Hello everyone and welcome back to Rising Sign Astrology. I'm really glad you're here because today we're diving into one of the most intense and often misunderstood chapters in astrology, Sade Sati. So this is the 7.5 year period where Saturn transits the sign before, over, and after your natal moon in the Vedic system. And for many people, it can mark a time of loss, pressure, and major emotional reckonings. But it's not just about the hard times, although it can feel like that. Sade Sati is about karmic clearing and growing up and learning how to build a life that actually holds up under pressure. And this video was inspired by a client who reached out recently completely out of answers, right? Since 2020, she had lost her mother, experienced a spiritual awakening, and been through betrayal, isolation, and a stalled out career, amongst other things. And nothing made sense for her. And when I looked at her chart, it clicked, right? She was in the middle of Sade Sati, and suddenly the chaos had context. So that's what I want to give you here today, clarity. If you're in it, or someone you love is, then this video will help you understand what's happening, how long it lasts, and most importantly, how to navigate it with less fear and more strategy. Now, just to be clear, while this concept comes from Vedic astrology, I primarily use Western astrology with the whole sign house system on my channel. But Saturn is one of those planets where the timing, the emotional weight, but most importantly, the karmic patterns is consistent across both systems. So today we're focused on Vedic astrology, but you can always check your natal D1 chart in Vedic and see your moon sign, and that will tell you if you're currently going through Sade Sati or not, right? Currently, the moon signs of Aquarius, Pisces, and Aries are experiencing Sade Sati from a Vedic perspective. Now, if you're new here and this kind of deep dive speaks to you, be sure to hit the subscribe button, tap the bell so you don't miss future uploads. And if you've already been through something like this and want to share your experience, please drop it in the comments. It really helps others who feel alone right now who are going through this. And if you're looking for a personal reading to make sense of your own story, you can find the booking info in the description below or at my website, Rising Sign Astrology. And with that said, let's break down what Sade Sati really is, why it hits so hard, and how to tell where you are in the cycle, or if you are. Because once you understand it, you stop taking the setbacks as personally, and you start to see the larger structure that Saturn is asking you to build. So let's get into it. So Sade Sati is one of the most feared periods in Vedic astrology. And for good reason. It's, like I said, roughly a 7.5 year cycle that begins when Saturn enters the sign before your moon, continues as it crosses over your natal moon, and then ends when it leaves the sign after. But when you're in it, it can feel like your life is completely unraveling, one piece at a time. But what most people don't realize is that it's not random. It's not a punishment. It's meant to pressure test your foundation, and it's karmic. And until you know you're going through it, it can feel like nothing makes sense. Like you're just stuck in this stretch of endless setbacks, loss, confusion, and bad luck, right? This may be where the term 7 years of bad luck came from. Now, there are 3 phases, like I said, and each one is distinct with their own unique emotional and external themes, right? Phase 1, where Saturn is in the sign before your moon, is when the unraveling starts to begin. Old belief systems, support structures, mentors, like this stuff starts to fall away. And this is the setup phase, and life starts to feel very unsettled. For some people, this could be the hardest phase. For some people, it could be the easiest phase. But typically, the second phase is the most hard. The first phase is the second most hard, and the third phase gets easier. But this could change depending upon your chart, right? If you have a lot of difficult planets in your last phase, in terms of where Saturn is in the sign after the moon, then that could be more difficult, right? So it all depends on your personal chart, but you know, broad strokes, that's typically how it goes. Now, phase two is when Saturn is on your moon, right? And this is usually when you hit emotional rock bottom. This is where depression, grief, anxiety, and isolation tends to hit the hardest. You tend to go through major losses, and that's the phase where they tend to occur. And it really is the meat of that karmic purge. And then phase three, when Saturn is in the sign after the moon, is when things start to feel a little bit lighter. Not easy, because none of these phases are going to be easy. It's Saturn, but a little bit lighter. This is when you start to integrate some of what you've gone through and, re-enter, your life in a sense. You're not the same person anymore, but you're also not fully rebuilt yet either. And the third phase tests whether you've learned your lessons and are ready to step forward differently, right? So all three are unique. All three test you continuously. Saturn is known for testing, but I usually see it as the second phase being the most difficult for people. Now, if you're in Sade Sati, it's very common to feel like the things that you once depended on are just falling away. People leave, security disappears, your identity feels like it's dissolving. And that's because Saturn is systematically stripping away anything in your life that's built on shaky ground. You're being forced to reckon with yourself, and there's just nowhere to hide. And it's not gentle, and it's also not fast. It's not like Ketu Mahadasha or like Uranus transit where things seem to happen overnight in a flash. It's a slow grind with Saturn, which makes it harder in some ways. And it's very thorough. And when you know you're in this window, I find it gives you a little bit more clarity to stop fighting the things that are ending and then to try to start adapting and then learning from it. When you're not aware that you're in Sade Sati, it becomes very, very difficult, right? When you're able to say, okay, I can accept that I'm in this phase. It's going to be this amount of time for phase one, this much for phase two, this much for phase three, and you're mentally prepared, it somehow makes it easier. When it feels like all of this bad luck is happening randomly and out of the blue, and you're like, why me? It's a lot more difficult. And like I said, Saturn spends 2.5 years in each sign. And when it touches the moon, right, the planet that governs your emotions, your mind, your sense of security in this world, it puts pressure on every part of your emotional life. But the themes will also be attached to the house that Saturn is transiting, right? For example, let's say you have an Aquarius moon and it's natally, in your 10th house. Then starting in 2020, Saturn would have entered your 9th house, right? Putting pressure on your beliefs or your worldview and possibly bringing up karmic themes around a parent or a mentor. And about 2.5 years later, Saturn would then have moved into your 10th house, crossing directly on top of your moon. And this is where you'd see major shifts in your career, your public identity, or maybe emotional burnout at work starts to show up at this time. Then in the final phase, Saturn moves into your 11th house, right? The sign after your moon, where it starts clearing out your social circles and networks and revealing who is truly supportive and who never had your back in the first place. So that's just one example, but you could apply it to your own chart and see how it would play out. And overall, the goal here isn't to scare you. It's to help you name what's happening so you can work with it. You don't need to fear Saturn, but you need to be aware and respect the process. And if you know how long it lasts, what part of it you're in, and what Saturn is asking from you, it does become more manageable. Not easy, but manageable, hopefully. And that's why I wanted to make this video, right? To help you understand what that means and how long it lasts and how to get through it with more clarity and less confusion. So the reason that it hits so hard is because this specific window is based on your moon sign, right? And the moon is your emotional core. It's your inner stability. It's, your psychological patterns and how you perceive the world. It's the lens through which you perceive the world and the external 3D events that are happening to you. And the moon represents your mind, your comfort, your emotional wiring. And Saturn is all about restriction and accountability and this karmic reckoning. So when Saturn hits these placements, it can feel very isolated. You can feel very isolated and you can feel very burdened and just very, very emotionally heavy. And the karma of Sade Sati isn't some abstract spiritual punishment. It's the consequences of patterns. Some that you've inherited, some that you've learned, and some possibly carried over from past lives, right? And these are playing out now in real time. And you're being asked to face the things that you've ignored and to take full responsibility for all the choices that you've made and let go of anything built on fantasy or avoidance. Apologies, my phone is ringing. It should have been off. And because it's not quick or soft, you're often brought to this breaking point where transformation isn't optional, it's necessary. And people who are most impacted by Sade Sati usually have moon signs in emotional or fixed signs like Cancer or Scorpio or Taurus or Leo, right? Signs where Saturn feels uncomfortable to begin with and has difficulty expressing itself. And that's not because you're doomed, right? It's because Saturn's energy doesn't blend easily with signs that resist control or crave emotional expression. And the result is that you might feel like you're being pushed to the edge emotionally and constantly tested in your relationships or blocked in your career. But again, this isn't meant to destroy, it's meant to strip away what's no longer working so that what remains is actually real and sustainable. That's what Saturn wants. And if you're looking at a Western chart and want to estimate your Sade Sati, you can do that with a sort of workaround. Even though Sade Sati is a Vedic concept, it still applies. You'd have to start by locating your moon sign within your Western chart. And keep in mind that the Western zodiac is roughly 23 to 24 degrees ahead of the Vedic sidereal zodiac, which means that your Vedic moon sign is usually one full sign off from your Western moon sign, right? If you're a Pisces moon Western, you most likely have an Aquarius moon from a Vedic perspective, but not guaranteed because it's only 23 to 24 degrees off. So let's go with that example. So if your Western moon is in Pisces, then you could have your Vedic moon in Aquarius. And from there, Sade Sati would begin when Saturn enters the sign before your Vedic moon sign. In this case, it would be Capricorn. And it would continue as it moves through the house that holds your moon, Aquarius, and then ends when it finishes the sign after, Pisces. And each transit would be about 2.5 years, so the full cycle spans around 7.5 years in total. So all you would have to do is just track Saturn's movement through the signs, and you should get a sense of when you'll be having Sade Sati. And even though this isn't a perfect method, it still gives you an accurate sense of when Sade Sati is happening and where it's hitting in your Western chart. You could also just look up your chart using, Vedic software or free software online, which would probably make it easier and more accurate. Now, not everyone, I should say, suffers the same way during Sade Sati, right? If your moon is strong and you're supported by benefics there, the transit may feel more like a sobering period of growth rather than total collapse. But even then, you're still going to be under intense pressure. Some people do have great success during Sade Sati, but it never comes without that pressure and the testing. Saturn loves to test and make sure that you've learned the lessons. And the advice here is pretty simple and practical, right? If you know you're going through this, slow down, cut out the distractions, but most importantly, take accountability. Saturn wants that. Saturn demands maturity. And yes, this is karmic, so some things are just going to be out of your control or are just going to happen. But still, there are things you can do to make it more bearable. Don't take shortcuts. Don't overextend yourself, right? Don't avoid hard decisions. In any Saturn transit, when you try to bypass the work that Saturn demands, you usually suffer more, because Saturn doesn't let anybody escape. And, because Sade Sati has a reputation for being one of the most emotionally and psychologically difficult periods in all of astrology, and for good reason, in my opinion, you know, it often shows up as deep loss, right? Whether it's the death of a loved one, the end of a major relationship, betrayal by the people you trusted, or just the slow collapse of a career or an identity that once felt so secure. And Saturn doesn't just take away things to punish you, it strips down whatever isn't built on solid ground. You have to realize that and keep that in mind. But the process is rarely graceful, it's not fun, and it feels like life is just pulling the rug out from underneath you. And one of the more painful effects of Sade Sati I found is that it can bring a lot of toxic people into your life, and it's usually very karmic. People who use you, people who deceive you, who waste your time and just simply add more chaos when you're already vulnerable. And it's not that Saturn's creating these bad people. Saturn is exposing the cracks in your boundaries and forcing you to see clearly who belongs in your life and who doesn't. And sometimes that means attracting people who mirror your own unresolved issues so you can finally deal with them. Other times it means just realizing, probably too late, that someone wasn't who you thought they were. And you might also find yourself in just bad situations, and they would seem to snowball. Financial strain, career setbacks, legal issues, family drama that drags out, way longer than it should, all of those things feeling like they're coming one after another. And the pattern with Saturn is that it slows everything down to test your resilience. You don't get quick fixes. You get long, drawn-out lessons. And it feels unfair while you're in it, and it feels overwhelming at times. But it's often meant to toughen you up and to help you clarify your values and to force you to mature. Emotionally, spiritually, even financially, depending upon where it's hitting. And another thing that makes Sade Sati so difficult is not just the events, it's the isolation. Other people don't understand what you're going through. From the outside looking in, it could appear that things are okay, things are good, like you have this dream job perhaps, but you're going to experience it like hell, like very difficult. Yes, maybe you have this job that looks phenomenal on paper and you're making good money, and it's like, what do you have to worry about? But you have a boss or colleagues that make your life a living hell, and they're betraying you, and they're constantly stressing you out, and then that job gets taken away because of that deception and betrayal. It's those types of things where you feel like you're on an island with it. And you may also feel like you're working harder than ever, but nothing's moving, no matter how much you try. And I found that it's really much like a karmic purge, right? The old baggage, the past life debts, the unresolved emotional patterns are all coming to the surface to be cleared. But the clearing process sucks, and it's a breakdown, a complete breakdown. But it needs to be broken down so you could be rebuilt. And that's the lesson. And if you're in Sade Sati, it is not uncommon to feel like everything's falling apart. But you have to try to understand what's happening and why, right? You have to try to compartmentalize and stop taking the pain personally and then using it. Saturn isn't trying to destroy your life. Saturn's trying to remove what doesn't serve you. And that process oftentimes feels brutal in the moment. Now, let me give just a personal example. The last time I went through Sade Sati, it was one of the most spiritually awakening periods of my life. And from that perspective, it was amazing. And I look back and I say, I'm so glad I went through that. But at the time, it was hell. It was one of the most devastating periods of my life. And it cracked me open in ways that I didn't expect or ever see coming. So, on the one hand, I experienced this deep internal shift, right? My priorities changed, my connection to spirituality and purpose evolved, and I started to see through the patterns that I'd been stuck in for years. But it didn't come gently, right? I lost a career that I loved at the time and paid me really, really well. My entire social network and community fell away almost overnight. I moved homes. I had 3 pets that I adored die. I lost close family members from separation, but also death. I even ended up in a new job surrounded by some of the most toxic people that I've ever worked with in my life. Right? People who actually ultimately betrayed me and then forced another painful ending in my career. But I look back now and say it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Because Sade Sati strips you down and doesn't offer an apology for it, but it offers a lesson. And if you're able to track it logically, it does become more manageable. I didn't realize till the very end that I was in Sade Sati the last time, or the time before last, I should say, but Saturn spends, like I said, about 2.5 years in each phase. So knowing that is happening, knowing the stage you're in, whether it's the beginning, the middle, the final phase, helps you mentally prepare. You can say to yourself, okay, I'm 1/3 of the way through. Now I'm halfway through. Now, all right, I got to be prepared. I know I'm entering the most intense part. Or I'm entering my final phase. Only 2.5 years left. I can do that. This is now the final clear out before it goes away. And I think that kind of tracking can be very helpful and grounding, especially when everything else around you feels uncertain. It doesn't feel like it's happening chaotically or randomly. It puts a structure to it. And I think it also helps to look at your chart more closely, right? The houses that Saturn is moving through during Sade Sati tell you the areas of life that are going to be restructured, right? Whether it's career, relationships, identity, home. And then also the planets in those houses or the signs can act like clues as well. So be aware of that. The more you understand the architecture of your own chart, the more clearly you're going to see what Saturn is asking from you. And no, it's not easy, never will be, but it's not meaningless. And if you're going through it, know that you're not alone, and that the more you work with it, the more it clears space for something real to emerge when you're done with it. And the point isn't to ruin your life. It's to burn through the karma that's been weighing you down, whether you realized it or not. And it's a deep, painful clearing process, but it's meant to clear away what's no longer aligned with your growth. And yes, it can come through grief and endings and loneliness and betrayal, but what's really happening is that your past life and present life baggage is being brought to the surface so it can be released. It reshapes your emotional patterns, it dismantles relationships and careers and situations that are built on illusion. Once you understand that you're in it and stop asking, why me? And start asking, okay, what is this here to teach me? It's easier. You could say, okay, let's push through this. Right? Maybe things you were clinging to weren't good for you. Maybe your husband left, but you didn't see that he was cheating on you on your business trips. Maybe your colleagues all turned on you, but you didn't see them when they were in the boardroom throwing you under the bus when you weren't there. And it's trying to purge what isn't best for you. And when it's over, you walk away and you walk out with karma cleared and your priorities realigned. So I'm recording this in one shot. I'm not going to edit it. So if you hear, phones in the background or people yelling for me in the background. I do apologize. I just don't have the time to edit it, but wanted to get this out. And before we close, I want to leave you with two key takeaways, right? What not to do during Sade Sati and what you can expect once you come out of the other side. One of the biggest mistakes that people make during this cycle is clinging to what is clearly failing them and what is clearly falling apart, whether it's a relationship, a job, or an identity. And it's because they're afraid of the unknown. Another mistake I see is isolating themselves completely. And while solitude is a natural part of this transit, believe me, I know, my first phase, I spent a lot of time alone. But cutting yourself off entirely from the world and support can make the emotional toll much, much heavier than it needs to be. And another thing I see is people also tend to make impulsive life decisions, especially during the middle phase, right? When Saturn's right on your moon. And it's because they're overwhelmed and looking for quick exits. But that's not the solution, right? And finally, one of the more subtle mistakes that I see is expecting success without doing the internal or external restructuring that Saturn is demanding, right? No, it's not a time for shortcuts. It never is, no matter what the Saturn transit is, but especially not Sade Sati. It is a time for clearing. That said, once Sade Sati ends, something shifts, right? Many people come out of it with a clearer sense of purpose and a life that finally reflects who they really are. And you may find yourself on a new career path that feels much more aligned. You'll rebuild relationships, but you're going to start from a place of stronger boundaries and more emotional clarity. And illusions, whether they came from society or family or your past version of yourself, will fall away for good. And perhaps most importantly, you mature. You don't outsource your worth anymore, and you stop running from discomfort. And you're able to step into your life with more power and more substance. Now, if you're in the heart of it, I know that doesn't help. It's not easy. But know this, it doesn't last forever, but who you become during it will. So thanks so much for sticking through this deep dive into Sade Sati and in general, just the power of Saturn and karma. I really do appreciate you listening. And if this helped you make sense of what you've been going through or have gone through, or gave you a new lens to look at your chart with, please comment below. I really think people going through it like to hear the stories and get the advice and get some encouraging thoughts out there. As always, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, hit the bell, all that fun stuff. I do have a lot more coming to help you understand, future transits and timing and patterns and all that good stuff. And if Saturn is currently activating a sensitive part of your chart, whether it's your moon, your ascendant, key planet, then, it's a pivotal time, and having clarity around it can be a big help. So whether you're in Sade Sati or Saturn return or Saturn's Mahadasha or just dealing with a heavy transit, I do offer personalized readings that can help make decisions easier and allowed to be made with more confidence and less confusion. And all of those booking details are down below. Or you can visit my new website at risingsignastrology.com. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you in the next video.